Hello and welcome to Simplified, the podcast that is guaranteed to leave you less or equal smart as you were to begin with. It does not tamper with your state of being and leaves you in a beautiful state of your native born ignorance. But today we are in danger of fouling or sort of violating that promise because we have one guy who is notorious for making people smarter. So we've brought him at a great risk. But
2 hours are his.
we'll try our best to to shield our listeners and make sure that they don't become smarter in any way. So please say hello to Amit Varma.
I mean,
Naren, thank you for the lovely introduction. I just heard the word fouling and I think that is appropriate. So, but congratulations to all of you. 300 episodes is like mind-blowing, and especially to still be friends after that time.
friends? Who said we are friends? Why do you think you're doing this remotely?
I know.
You
One fellow went up to Canada only because he couldn't stand us anymore.
I needed at least 2 oceans of distance.
No, congratulations. And I think most outsiders don't get what kind of insane sort of perseverance it takes to actually get these numbers up. So 300, mind-blowing. Well done, guys.
We're raising I'd like to raise the podcast, the mic, but I think our producer will have a problem with that.
Yes.
I'll just raise a USB stick. It's actually the same structure as a bat. So actually, let me take a screenshot of this.
This works very well for an audio podcast. So, people can see what
we are raising profound things. Please.
I used to quip, I have a face for audio. I think we all have a face for audio.
Oh, yeah.
Well met, folks.
Cheers to that.
Amit, this is not your first appearance on a simplified milestone episode. You, of course, were there for episode 100 all those years ago. When was it? 2017? 2018? I forget who.
Yours is a weekly show, right? So 200 episodes ago would be 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow, he did the math. Yeah. Podcasters are very good at dividing by the number 52 for some reason. How have things changed for you since then?
Oh, completely. I mean, completely in the sense that I got to understand what the hell I'm doing. Because I think what is probably true for all of us when we started is that we didn't really know what is a medium, what is a show, what are we going to do. Even you guys, Naren has spoken in the past to me about how even your show gradually found its kind of voice where perhaps at an early stage you would maybe scripting too much, overthinking it, trying too hard, and then it fell into place till it's this beautiful free-flowing thing that I am going to attempt to foul up now. But I think what happened in my case was that I sort of realized, with the changing times, the sort of the way people were consuming content and relating to it was changing. And I was just at a place where I'm on the cusp of that and I'm figuring this shit out as I go along. And I think my biggest realization in all of this time is that when people are listening to a podcast or they are watching some audiovisual content or they are reading something, all reading, there are different modes of it, right? So what happens with my show typically, and I think it's true of all podcasts, that you'd rather have, say, 10,000 people listen to an episode than 10 million people watch a YouTube video you put out, because your average view time there is 15 seconds. Here it is way, way more. The engagement is much more. I have got, like the last 3 times I've been at an airport, and this is eerie, somebody's kind of stopped me and said, "Are you so-and-so? Thank you for what you do." And I'm sure you kind of run into that as well, where there is intimate connection building between the podcast and the listeners. And I think the key realization is that people are in different modes, that, there is very thick engagement where you're really involved with something, and there is thin engagement when you're skimming the surface. And if you look at it from the outside, what I used to think was that, hey, all of modern life is what? It has now become scroll up and down continuously or swipe left, right, and you're taking in everything in 10-second chunks or 15-second chunks and so on and so forth. And sort of doing the podcast and discovering my audience and discovering what I wanted to do with the show made me realize that, boss, that is not the case. This attention span, theek hai, all of us, there are times where we have short attention spans, but all of us, there are also times where we sit down and we want something immersive. So, so that I think is sort of my kind of biggest discovery in this period. And there's a cliche on my show about how we contain multitudes, and that holds true of me as well, and that holds true of all of us, that how we spend our time will determine, in a sense, who we become. Right? That old thing about what you do now shapes your future self. It's an investment in your future self. So if I'm just doing short attention span, shallow engagement things, scrolling up and down, swiping this way and that way, it affects my future self. And at the same time, if I sit down and I really dig in and try to understand something, that makes my future me smarter in a relative sense, not smarter than anybody else. So, relative to me.
This guy is completely ruining Simblified. Okay, we are not supposed to be this profound and all.
we spoke about fouling it up. Yeah. So that is it in a nutshell. Now you know what you're going to get if you ask questions.
Our show actually contains multitudes because Amit, the last time you were here, I was not. So
exactly.
And we've got.
But now we contain multi-dudes.
Multi-dudes. I was just going to say that. Multi-dudes and multitudes.
We had to get it out of the way.
Multi-dudes could get you cancelled, boss. And multitudes is also incompatible with the current vibe, but multi-dudes will certainly get you cancelled. Well done. Like, speaking of manners, like, what is this, man?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
We've stuck to it for 300 episodes. But Amit, one of the things that I wanted to sort of touch upon was that usually, like, when people consume your podcast, right, especially post-pandemic, and this is anecdotal, is that you're actually enriching your mind and your body because, like, earlier consumption was probably during commutes or drives or whatever, and then it changed to like your run or your like gym time or something like that. And like your podcast actually sort of helps people go the extra round. At least for me, you're like Amit is doing this. Let's do one more round and maybe consume chip away at a little more of that 8-hour episode, which is actually very enjoyable. What is your sort of experience been like? Have people told you where they consume podcasts and like how they do it? And did you have like anything that you took out of that to change your show? Or
my slogan used to be the seen and the unseen, making India fitter one episode at a time. So and I guess
Chuck's already gotten there. He's reached the end point, as you can see.
Yeah, I'm not taking any credit for that, and also it didn't make me fitter. So हम तो फैले जा रहे हैं. But so I mean, I think we know the three standard use cases like commuting, working out, doing errands, which during COVID was really washing vessels and all of that. So I guess that kind of remains. But the other thing that I knew, but that I've thought more about and realized at a deeper level is that if I put an episode out this week and you don't listen to it this week, I'm okay with it. In fact, for a lot of episodes, I know it's going to be that way. Because my sort of conceit somewhere at the start was that I'm not just trying to go across space in terms of having people everywhere listen to me, but also go across time and try and create episodes people listen to like 30 years later. But, and wo to kehne wali baat thi, but I think I've seriously kind of achieved a little bit of that oral history feel with like the 2 recent 8-hour episodes I did with Jerry Pinto and Shanta Gokhale. And that makes me feel so satisfied because those episodes are those conversations which contain so much, contain a person's life and all of that, are something that will survive the guest, will survive me. They'll be there after we are gone. And that's meaningful. That is so gratifying to me. And I will, of course, get drop-offs from people saying, hey, we used to like them when they were small 3-hour episodes. Everything is relative. But why don't you go back to your shorter 4-hour formats? Which by and large, I mean, I'm still around 4.5 hours. It's just the odd episodes that really takes off. So that's kind of satisfying that, earlier, there's a point in time, like there's a curve. Maybe it's a bell, I'm just thinking aloud, maybe it's a bell curve of how much validation you need. That you kind of start off and 30 people are going to listen to you and you don't, you just do what you do, you're having fun. Then you want validation and your desire for validation is, that desire is a bell curve, it's going up. And then after a point in time, you just take a certain joy in the work itself, right? And I think I kind of got there, not completely got there because one is not, Buddhist to not care about, validation. But so it's given me a better understanding of what it is I'm doing. And the point is, what I did say in episode 200, what I did in episode 100, for example, I need to do the first 99 to get there. What I do in 200, I need to do that in between. Where I am today, I couldn't have been here even a year ago. right? So you need to kind of go through those spaces and get to where you are and have a slightly better understanding of what it is you're doing.
Has the ethos of the scene of Gen Z, apart from the length and all that, has that changed since you started? And like the reason I ask is when Naren and I started Simplified all those years ago, and the reason it was called Simplified also was we intended to simplify things that happen around us. And I think we have wavered gloriously from there. We really do. I mean, we do the odd episode where we take whatever the James Webb Telescope or something and actually simplify it in the truest sense of how we started. But I think, and this is conceit on my part, we think that simplified has now become a verb unto its own, which kind of means like random banter and conversations with a little bit of trivia jokes and stuff thrown in there. So we know what the seen and the unseen meant when it started. Do you think that has kind of changed over time? And if you want to extract meta lessons from there, please go ahead as well.
I think it's changed in the healthy evolution. So the seen and the unseen is a phrase in a essay by Frederick Bastiat, 19th century French guy who wrote this essay called That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen, where he came up with something called the broken window parable. That, if somebody breaks a window, people say that, hey, the guy who repairs it will get some work, so good for the economy. But what Bastiat pointed out is that that's a seen effect. The unseen effect is that the money that the guy who owns the window spent, he could have spent on something else and that would have generated more whatever. So, and the broken window fallacy was often used to kind of justify wars and all that, good for the economy, that kind of nonsense. So, but the initial idea of the show was that I'm just going to talk about the unintended effects of public policy, that price control hua hai, you think the price is getting controlled, actually you're creating a scarcity in the good, for example. So it was a very sort of shallow focus in that sense, that I'm just focusing on one thing, 15-20 minute mein karenge, we're done with it. From there, it evolved to where it was more about a subject and it got broader and broader about a subject. Then around the time I start reaching 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, a Kashmir episode, the CAA episode, it's really deep dives into subjects. So I'll find a particular subject I want to talk about, get a hardcore expert in it, and just go all in and deep dive hard and deep dive so hard that I would, do the prep to make myself a semi-expert in it so I can have that kind of conversation and go off in those different directions. Where it has evolved in the last year and a half is that now I don't care about the subject anymore. In fact, it is not even about subjects. Now I care about people. The focus moved from subjects to people. Because part of what happened is that when I started doing those deep dives into subjects, I figured, ki, theek hai, right at the start, let me talk about the person also, where they grew up, their influences and all of that, humanize them a bit. And that started working. Now it started working at different levels. One is the instrumental level, that you are making the person comfortable. So if you are an expert on a subject, you'll come with certain sound bites prepared, right? Which you've said 1,000,000 times to people. But then I ask you a question about your childhood and I ask you about your dad and your mom and all of that. And you're talking in your own language because you may never have spoken about this stuff. And then you continue talking in your own language. So that is one instrumental level for the guest. Another instrumental level for the audience is that for the audience, any subject is a dry subject. I want to listen to person Y on subject X. I can just go on YouTube and there'll be 1,000 talks and the subject is dry and blah, blah, blah. And if you're not genuinely interested, there's nothing there. But when you humanize the person before, they are looking at that subject in a different way because they understand where this person is coming from and where they're going with it. So these were sort of the two instrumental reasons why it became useful to talk about a person. But then over a period of time, I realized that those episodes, like the more I talk about a person, I think the connections are much deeper because the truth is that, right now, as we are recording remotely, I'm looking at like 4 rectangles on a screen, right? We have 4 disconnected, atomized people sitting in separate places. What brings us together? What brings us together is that we know stories about each other, right? That's basically it. The world is complex. We make sense of the world by telling stories about it. And every single connection that we have is, and not literally stories in the sense that Naren excels at, but just that every single interaction is really a continuation and a story and a narrative arc between us, right? Which gets richer in a certain way. And so these episodes where you have people kind of talking about themselves and you're going deeper into that, I feel that people connect to them just way more. And what also happens is when these are people in their 60s or 70s or even older, Shantaji was 83, we tend to take it for granted that, boss, what I have lived through, everybody's got a common understanding of what it is to, live through that. But like, I remember I grew up in the pre-liberalization time, like, so did Naren. I think the rest of you are a bit younger. So yeah, so Naren and I have the shared experience. कि दूरदर्शन एक channel होता था, दूरदर्शन. There was Krishi Darshan on it. It would take you 5 years to get a phone, and we have certain shared experiences and a sense of that. But 70% of the country is born after 1991, right? Even younger than all three of you. So there is that shared sense of what this country isn't there, but we assume as if that shared sense is there. That when there is something that, for example, offends us, we assume that the other person will at least understand why it is offensive to us, little realizing that it is not part of the landscape at all, that we've all grown up in different India's multitudes, as it were, again. And I find that these personal stories therefore become really sort of invaluable to me in making these connections. Various times people will write in and say that, hey, this episode made me cry, or that one really made me cry, which is, and I've been very fortunate in that my guests are willing to kind of sit and just go with it, because I think they've heard the show before, they know what it's like, and once they agree to participate, they're kind of willing to go for that. And it's also reciprocal. When you make yourself vulnerable and you're telling stories about yourself, you are going to get that from the other side as well, and that can create beautiful connections and beautiful moments. And so many guests have told me that, hey, the stuff I spoke to you about today, I've never spoken about it to anyone else, right? And so that's kind of what I aim for.
I find that incredible, right? So you mentioned this before, and I mean, how unlikely to open up on your innermost feelings, many of which you are not clear about yourself, on a show which is listened to by hundreds and thousands of people. So that is something which is awesome. I lack words for that. Yeah.
Adding to that, I mean, I think I really loved one point you talked about how you pivot from a subject to a person. And that's something that's really, I mean, for you're actually talking about some very hard policy stuff in your podcast as such. And when you look at how Simplified has kind of evolved, we also understood that we initially tried to make it all about the subject with the scripting and all that stuff after a point of time. But then we kind of realized that the reason why people listen to us is that they get a certain amount of, the more of us that we pour into the episode, the more of Naren they see, the more of Tony they see, more of Chuck and more of Shrikit they see in that episode, the more they kind of get to know these characters and what that allows them to do, and still why they listen. So first is that familiarity. You fall in love with these characters and the familiarity with them. And then, like, when we bring out a new strain of, when we talk about, say, I mean, we're talking about, say, the Sri Lanka crisis, or we're talking about any of the other new topics, it's about taking a leap into the unfamiliar from the familiar, right? So that angle also gives a lot of comfort for a lot of people to kind of like, okay, I'm in a safe space enough to explore something new, rather than like just being thrown into a deep end of something which someone very unfamiliar who's talking to me in a way that I'm not comfortable with. Right. So I think those angles also make a huge difference. And I think that makes a huge difference with your voice as well, because when people are like, I know Amit, I know how he goes about things, and therefore I'm going to get into this particular groove. So I think that familiarity angle plays a huge part, and that's what actually keeps us going for as long as we have both the podcasts. Yeah.
Oh, that was beautiful. I never thought of it that way. It's a fascinating episode, but we must take a break, and we will see you back on the other side. And now, back to our chat with Amit Varma. Are you enjoying episode 300 so far? We hope you are. So let's just dive right back into it.
I think, and I was going to come to this at the end of my answer, where I think you hit the nail on the head, in the sense that when you start the show, your name for the show, like my name for my show, indicates that there'll be a subject. We'll be speaking about a subject. But now really the charm of the show is what? The charm of the show is you guys bantering with each other, right? The subject is a mere sort of bahana that is there, it's there, but, and the subject is a useful anchor. So it is not just random, there's something that your banter can be anchored around, but the banter is what matters, and the banter is what matters because you guys are what matters. Because in listeners' mind, there's a story about each of you. They know they'll know Naren's idiosyncrasies. Each of your kind of particular ways of looking at the world. And the other thing there is a couple of points I'll make, because you've kind of sparked a few thoughts there. And one point is that often it is not so much the subject that matters. Like if I think I'm interested in X, what is the interesting thing there is not X, but my interest in X. So when you talk about a subject, you are on a journey to understand something. And if the listener shares that journey, if they are somewhere on that journey, there is that immediate connect. So you do not have to be experts, right? So the approach that you'll often bring to your thing, where you'll say that, hey, we are also trying to figure it out. Let's chat about it, right? That's a beautiful approach, because you're not preaching from top down ki bhai, this is how it is, right? So that's one point, and something that's I would say worked in your favor. And the other point about subjects to people is that, in a sense, I've become sick of subjects here. The kind of things I used to write about or care about 5 years ago, I don't give a damn anymore. Matlab, I'm just, maybe it's some kind of outrage fatigue or whatever, ki, ye economic policy hua, GDP is there, this is, like, no one gives a shit anymore, right? We just want to get on with our lives, do what we are doing. And the real things that divide us are not subjects, right? I may disagree with my neighbor on a particular subject. I have a view, he has a view. But the truth is that subject doesn't matter. It is, as there are bahanas for you, that subject is a bahana. He has joined a particular tribe and thinks in a particular way. I might also have made the same mistake at my end, and therefore we are not talking to each other, right? So the subject is irrelevant there. So to get to that point where you're accepting that people contain multitudes, that what makes me cry can make you cry, and to have those kind of connections springing up, I think that's sort of.
I mean, that's brilliant actually, because that specific thing, I think one of the episodes that kind of I did the simplification of was this brief period where, the last year, where I was actually like, I got into American football, right? And in India, American football is really not a sport that anyone follows. And we did this entire episode where we tried to simplify it. And I felt that was a self-indulgent episode for me, because it was just me gushing about this new thing that I found and I find exciting, right? And what I felt was self-indulgent and probably boring for listeners. I actually got feedback where I heard people, they were like, we were really interested in the excitement that you had for the subject. Right, the excitement that you had for the subject kind of came out, and I had like a friend another listener who told me this, and I was like, I think that's the key part that we are really looking for. And the other angle which you talked about, which is about being bored of subjects, I totally resonate with that, because when we started, I started on Simplified. Obviously, Naren and Chuck started Simplified, and I joined in later. But when I joined in, I almost felt a pressure like, oh, there is this new topic that's come out. How are we not simplifying it? Why can't we have to do an episode about this? We have to do an episode about this. And like, it took a while. It took a few years. And after that, like, first you stopped caring about it. And then you were like, we don't really need, this is our objective is, we're not the news. We're not trying to cover everything that we have to make sure that this is covered or not. It's about whether we feel excited and interested about a topic, and then we kind of cover it in our own way. So I think that was the big difference that actually got us more comfortable, and also made our listeners also more comfortable with us.
Yeah, bang on.
I've heard, growing up, right, one of the things that teachers used to tell you is that the three most powerful words in the English language is saying, I don't know, right? And on this show, we pretty much say that all the time, right? Like, we are learning along with you. Sometimes during the, 1 hour recording, we have like a Wikipedia window open, and we're discovering things as we go along, right? Like, it's that whole combined study feel where like you've actually got together to study for the exam, but basically there's like lots of banter going on and all of that. But Amit, just to sort of change tack a little, you spoke about how context builds empathy, and also about like how you've grown along with your podcast, right? And it is particularly true for us. I think Chuck, Sriket and me have grown along with Simplified, older, and Naren's grown younger as the years.
Wow, that was actually very profound. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, so
Love it.
Like, we are all in the mid-30s phase where we are figuring life out, right? Like, till now it was all set on core, saying, you do this, you then do a second degree, then you put in hard yards and all of that. But now it's sort of like the middle of the ocean, right? The doldrums where nothing happens, and you have to figure life out for yourself. And like, sort of indulgently, I set up a Substack called whereisbillwatterson.substack.com. The premise being that, actual people who are happy in content in life, you won't find them on social media or interviewed or on magazines, etc. Right? And you're probably like one, sort of outlier where we get to hear so much about you. And also realizing that you've chosen an avenue which is obviously not the most economically viable thing you can do, right? Your hourly rate of poker far exceeds your hourly rate of what you get out of a podcast. So, I mean, I just want to hear your perspective on that. How did you figure that out for yourself? Is that something that you're clear about now, or is that still a journey you're on?
No, it's a journey on. I mean, everyone's a work in progress, right? And I quit. Like, I was a professional poker player for 5 years, for those who don't know. But in 2015, I quit, and I was a sort of a winning player throughout, but not at the level where I'm breaking through and making a few money and never need to work again. Didn't scale to that level. And even though it made me, much more money than, say, writing did, it was just corrosive to my lifestyle. It was really toxic in that sense, and poker demands a certain obsessiveness. So I had stopped reading books, stopped meeting friends, stopped. Everything was poker, and I thought I was unhealthy. So, which is why I left. So for a couple of years, I wasn't really doing much. For a while, and my plan always was write books. Right. And then the podcast experiment happened, and I think everyone knows the origin story. But if any listeners don't, in very brief, I think as a tribute to you guys, I should sort of repeat it.
Amit, I must mention before you came on, we sort of like agreed with each other. Let's not flog that dead horse again. But since you brought it up organically, completely on your own, who are we to
bask in the glory?
No. I will very briefly.
We only hear it in your words.
So I was hanging out with a bunch of friends at Naren's house, and Naren, I think, got a Diwali gift or a New Year gift or whatever, and it was a hamper.
Chuck was there too.
Chuck came later. And one of the things there was this massive selfie stick. So we took this selfie stick, and then just as we were leaving, Chuck came over to record Simplified with Naren. And I mean, if I get any details wrong, let me know. So we quickly took a photograph with this incredible giant selfie stick, which I think goes from Malad to Borivali if you're standing in the right place. And we call it NSSS, the Narendra Shenoy selfie stick. And so we took that photograph, and that was that. And then I generally go on Facebook about once a month, but I happen to go on at a vague date on Facebook, and where I think one of these two announced that Simblified has been picked up by IVM Podcasts, and I congratulated them. And the chap who runs IVM, Amit Doshi, he then came in the comments and said, "Hey, do you remember, Amit, I once asked you if you want to do a podcast with me, and you said no. Do you think you'd be interested now?" So I said yes, and we met, and then the seen and the unseen happened. And of course, I parted ways from IVM shortly after that, but a while after that, not shortly. But that's kind of the delightful origin story, and I've completely forgotten what thread we were on.
No, I was just asking you about how you figured out what you wanted to do and like separate.
Yeah, so it was like an experiment. So like I said, initially I thought 15-20 minute thingy, it's an experiment. Wasn't looking at it for revenue. It's like a hobby which you do on the side while you do whatever else you do. And then it took a life of its own, and it's made me decent revenue in the sense that when COVID started, I did a couple of things. One is I opened the show up to people to contribute whatever they wanted to if they enjoyed listening to the show, and I was kind of blown away by the initial surge of goodwill at the start. And I don't advertise that. There's a little bit at the end of the show, and there's something on my webpage, but a lot of people contribute every single month and are regular at it. So they're keeping the show going. And the other thing I did was I kind of realized that in the creator economy, you do things for reach and you do things for revenue. And the show got me reach and credibility. And then I started selling an online writing course, which has done really well. So I've had like 2,100 students so far. And that did reasonably well and continues to do well. So that was a happy accident. But I mean, the key thing there also was that, one can't be cynical about the revenue part of it. That if you do X for reach and Y for revenue, you also have to treat Y as if it is a labor of love and put everything into it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Otherwise, it's kind of going to break down. So that was a big lesson that I learned. But, you asked me about my journey and all of that. I'm kind of in that place where every single day I'm mad at myself because there are so many things that I want to do and get done, and I wish I had like 1/10 the discipline of Chuck, then I'd be able to get this out of the way. Or even half the discipline of young Naren, who's written some of his books. I don't know if he's told you guys about it.
Slide.
Yeah, but so I've kind of been struggling with things that I I've known forever I want to do, but I just haven't been able to get down to it. So I've shot stuff I want to put on YouTube, but not done that yet. Maybe, by the time this episode broadcasts, who knows? But and plus there are books I want to write. So a lot of stuff which the thing about the reason I never take a break from the scene and the unseen, like people will say, hey, take a couple of weeks off or whatever.
So that they can catch up.
So that they can catch up. No, but the thing is, if I take a break, that's the end of the show. Because I know myself. I'll procrastinate endlessly. I'll say, hey, one more week, agle hafte karte hai, blah, blah, blah. And it'll simply never happen. So the weekly deadline keeps me honest. I have to do it.
And at this point of time, since it's 300 episodes, I actually do want to give a shout out to IVM and their producers over the years, because very often the four of us are like, we don't have an episode now, we just rebroadcast something. And Anthony, our producer, in his small voice would be like, yeah, guys, let's not rebroadcast. And then we're like, we need to do an episode. And we somehow, and I don't think we have rebroadcast in the longest time, and I definitely can't remember the last time we've actually taken a break. So this is a little shout out to all the producers that we've had over the years, and most recently, of course, Anthony. So yeah, I think that consistency and putting yourself out on a weekly basis or a periodic basis, I think absolutely helps.
What do you feel about the show now? I'd like to ask you guys. Like, what do you feel about the show now and the evolution that it's made over this period of time?
Which one, yours or ours?
Your show. Bro.
No, man. Like, I think when we started Simplified, I think it was meant to be an experiment to hang out with somebody who I wanted to always do a project with. And I don't think that has changed. I think the show has gone on many ups, downs, avatars, whatever. But I think that fundamental thing hasn't changed. And even today, when we sync up to record, it's honestly, we forget that there's a mic. At least I forget there's a mic in front of us. And it's honestly just an excuse to hang out with three very smart people.
Likewise. So, one thing for me, it's been discovering what I'm not, right? So, first, I thought I was a good explainer. First I thought I was old. I'm not one. I thought I was a good explainer. I wasn't. We weren't, actually. We were awful at explaining stuff. Then we thought we were funny, and we found out we were not that funny either. But one thing that we were sort of, we liked like each other, and we could keep the ball rolling in terms of the conversation, and that seemed to strike a chord in our listenership. And as Chuck said, nowadays I just look forward to it because it gives me an opportunity to hang with the four of us, three other guys who are just as smart or dumb as me, which is quite a difficult thing in these straitened times to find. Yeah, so that was one thing. Other thing which I sort of learned from Amit, maybe it's not really Amit. You would have figured it out. It's as you grow, as you do something more and more, you lose a lot of the thin desires, which validation. You want that noise, you want that applause, you want that hit of rush of dopamine, whatever, and you just want to do something which is very indescribable. It's something which has meaning to you and you alone. If it also has meaning to other people, so be it, but you basically do it for yourself. It's cliched, but it's actually true, is what I feel. I've seen this happening a lot in Seen and the Unseen too. So, and people sense it and people like it, and they, at some level, they benefit immeasurably from it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's, I joined Simplified midway because the thing is, generally from me coming from a background of being a Wikipedia administrator, I generally have a thing about just reading random shit on the internet, right? And Simplified seemed like the perfect avenue where I can just come and spout whatever I randomly read on the internet this week and share it with these guys. Over time, and that's what it's evolved. I think what the evolution became, and yes, we say that line that it's about hanging out with four friends, but also it's actually helped me quantify and understand what chemistry means, right? When you talk about with your co-hosts and how that thing works and how audiences pick up on it and how audiences stick with it, right? Because it's such an intangible about what chemistry is, and I think the most tangible example is the chemistry between the four of us when we talk, and how we can, without a topic, just start rolling and go 50 minutes into a conversation without understanding where it is. I mean, the ice cream episode comes to mind with Naren, where it's one of our most legendary episodes, and I think that was like chemistry in its purest form, right? So I think that's something that I've discovered over this time. And I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, it's almost like, and like when Chuck said that when we are feeling lazy or we can't record or whatever, and the producers push us, we have something so great going. We owe it to just push ourselves to keep going, right? Like because we know that this is something that works so well, and that it's also as effortless for us. Because honestly, I mean, believe us, it's not something that we are doing with a lot of effort at all. Something that we kind of like just turn up and decide to talk on. And I mean, we enjoy it. The audience enjoys it. We're creating something that we all like. It's such a beautiful product as such. As what is the real motivator for us?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just since I'm last, I'll take two things. Right, one is basically how much it has sort of helped me to hang out and have adult friendships, right, which are often not very easy. Given like if you go to office and you're forced to hang out with a set of people in close proximity, etc., and you never end up speaking to people you want to really speak to. So this podcast has really been a way to just hang out with some wonderful, fun people, right? And like, especially during the pandemic when Chuck and Srikit took a break, and it was just Naren and me. And I was like, what the hell am I going to contribute when it's just Naren, right? And it was actually great because we kept the show going, and I learned so many things along the way during, like, probably one of the hard phases for a lot of people, right? And just having that conversation, having fun was great. And the other thing is that since I came into this podcast as the last person, I could see how, like, insanely comfortable these guys were, right? And I was really like on my first recording, I was shitting bricks. I was like, what is going on? Like, how am I going to get through this and stuff like that, right? And at that point, I remember we had a very active WhatsApp group, which Chuck only started, but it turned into cricket, and then he left. And we tried to start a podcast before the 2019 World Cup, and it was absolute chaos, right? But like 3-4 years later, after Simblified, we were like, okay, let's get this going again. And during the pandemic, we started something called Bits and Pieces, which has done 60 episodes so far. We've had 35 different people on the show, right? And so much so that when we speak of a panel, last week actually was the first time we had a positive gender ratio, in the sense that 3 out of 5 of our guests were women, right? And 4 of them had debuted on Bits and Pieces less than a year ago. So just to, sort of be that show where you can tell people, listen, if these guys can do it, anyone can do it, I think is a great feeling in itself. And Bits and Pieces, I think, is a great example of how that's come to be. So, yeah.
Did I answer your question, Amit? A long time ago, you asked a question about how the show evolved. I'm not quite sure.
No. It's answer it, and I want to double click on something interesting. Both.
I see what you're doing, Amit. By the way, I see what you're doing. You've turned the tables nicely. There are 4 of us over here. Be very careful because we have time till about 8.
No. So, you guys mentioned these terms like chemistry and adult friendships and so on, and that resonates with me in the sense that when I've had friends on the show, like Naren's been on the show, Chuck's been on the show, other people I think I've known very well have been on the show, and I've known them very well. There are people I've hung out with 10-15 years, like I did a really memorable episode with Chandrahas Chaudhary, and one of the things I realized while doing the episode is that I didn't know them at all till I actually sat down on my show and spoke to them for 5 hours, because all the rest of our conversations, which could span tens or dozens of or hundreds of hours, were at a certain kind of shallow level where you're almost doing what ChatGPT does, like autocomplete on steroids, the other guy will say something, you'll say something, you'll sip your beer or whatever it is. I mean, and and it stays at that kind of shallow level, which is beautiful. I mean, part of friendship is you don't have to go deep. You can just sit and say nothing and it's great, and you're just chilling and you're happy in that company. But I think what doing the podcast did was that it took conversation to a different level. And I would imagine that is that something that you've seen happen with you as well? That you could be at a pub and hanging out and having a beer for an hour, and nobody has to focus, nobody has to engage with the other person. You don't even have to, listen that hard, though I'm sure you do. But when you're actually recording for the podcast and having that conversation, does it immediately sort of, deepen your connection with each other? So what would your kind of take be on that? Because it is not just 4 friends sitting and talking, right? There's the quality of talking is slightly different.
Wow, I didn't realize this would lead to a therapy session. But I think, yes, I think some of my favorite episodes of Simplified have been what I like to call the slightly deeper ones, especially those that Naren or Tony actually helm. Because there was a time, I think sometime last year, where we started doing episodes like that. And those were so beautiful and so nuanced, and it gave me sides of these two guys, which I kind of instinctively knew but hadn't heard voiced, if that kind of made sense, right?
Give an example. Give examples.
I think it's Tony and his stoicism episode.
The stoicism episode, absolutely. And the meaning of life and episodes like that. And even, I think, in the quality of questions, like the episode that you guys did recently, which I was just telling you about, the interview that you did recently with Rohit Sir, correct?
Yeah.
The quality of questions you were asking, one, it shows your evolution as a question asker, but I loved how you were trying to get deep into that mental model side of thing, which really opened up my mind into how you think, and this is the way you're approaching the world around. Again, it's all very subtle, and I'm like completely riffing right now. It's not like at that point of time I know Tony is like a better thinker than I thought he was or something. But yeah, I think that inherently is there. I don't think we've all sat and thought about it very deeply, but I think to some extent it is there.
I think one angle which comes out is in some ways, like there are certain rough peripheral roles that each of us kind of take in the episode. Like Chuck is this like bad jokes guy. Then
I will have
Tony has a slightly more refined puns that he will throw in the middle somewhere, and then Naren will have his stories, and I will bring some research into the mix and all that stuff. But what really is interesting is when actually we step out of those shtick roles, right? Like when, say, randomly, like I see like Naren's done like this deep research into something, and he's talking like in that, like he's not in story mode at all. Like Tony is going off into his philosophical angle. Actually, there are episodes where like Tony's gotten really passionate or angry about things and all that stuff, and like you get to see that shade of him. And then Chuck going deep into philosophical stuff, and he's like actually self-reflective and all that stuff. So those angles actually like become really interesting for me to see, because like because we tend to paint people into brushes and put them into corners, and here is where we actually get to see like, okay, we are full whole people who actually span a whole spectrum of thinking, and we're all like individual, very intelligent, very nuanced people individually, rather than like these shticks, so to speak. Yeah.
And I think we think the same way of our guests as well. Sometimes we get them on for a particular topic and expertise, kind of mirroring your experience of it, but also realize that behind these are actual humans. Like, and very often I think these conversations end up, again, the episodes with your economics professor, Shrikesh.
Ashish,
was that way, right? Yeah, where we called him on for economics, but I don't know if he spoke about that much economics at all. We tended to talk mostly about his life, worldview and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I kind of took that entire philosophical angle.
Exactly. It goes back to what you're saying, Amit. I think there are stories behind each one of us, and part of me, sometimes when I listen to your episodes, and I very often listen to your episodes, I often say, people ask me, how do you cycle so much? I say, these are just excuses to get through a scene and the unseen episode. I actually distinctly remember the route I took when I was listening to the Nikhil Taneja episode. And, it makes me stop and think, because you pass so many people on the way. Like, each of these guys probably has an episode. Sure, like, they probably won't be there on Amit's show or any podcast, but how beautiful would it be to actually sit with a random person and, like, what was their life story? Just ask the first question, like, tell me where you grew up and all that. There's just so many strands that could come from there. It makes me feel like there are, like, 1.4 billion, 7 billion stories just waiting to be told that way. And I think that's a more profound takeaway that I have when I listen to shows like yours. It's a fascinating episode, but we must take a break, and we will see you back on the other side. And now back to our chat with Amit Varma. Are you enjoying episode 300 so far? We hope you are. So let's just dive right back into it.
Yeah, the less profound takeaway for me was that I just enjoy drinks with you guys more, right? Like, it's just much more relaxed. Like, I mean, like, I used to be a really shy kid growing up, right? And like, irrespective of, even if they're really close friends, when I'm hanging out in a group, I used to get lots of social anxiety, right? But just going back to the point around how context builds so much more, richness and empathy. Like, I don't have to like pre-drink to come and drink with you guys. Right? I'm in a comfortable space, and like I can be myself. So I think that really helps, which is because we've all become friends on the internet. but it's not the same thing when you meet in real life, right? So I think it's just like made it so much richer and so much more enjoyable just to hang out with you guys, which is something that everyone should do more often.
I want to butt in with a PG Wodehouse reference here. Okay? So,
Of course you do.
there is this character in Wodehouse, one of the Wodehouse novels called Blair Eggleston. I don't know if you guys know. So Blair Eggleston is one of those fearless, bold writers. Okay? So he
Naren,
writes
at some point, we don't even know if you're just making up random Wodehouse characters that don't exist. Right? Like, we've all read Wodehouse, but like Naren makes these
I've
don't
never heard of
remember
Blair
Blair.
Eggleston.
But, okay.
He's doing a chat
So,
GPT on us.
I'm
Wild
actually
hallucinations.
doing, okay.
So
He's there. He's
Blair
Jeeves
Eggleston
and the
is one of
greasy bird.
one of the bold writers who has drunk the dregs of humanity and writes about depravity and everything. So Wodehouse writes, in real life, he's an extremely timid guy, right? So Wodehouse writes, if he had never been in a room with a scantily clad Russian princess, but if he was, he would take the seat closest to the door and talk about the weather. So that would be Tony.
And for all those who question, yes, it does exist. This is a character in Jeeves and the Greasy Bird, as I am reading from Wikipedia. Jeeves and the Greasy Bird. It's a short story by Indian podcaster Narendra. Okay, never mind. Sorry. Ignore what I said. Producer, please delete that last bit. Oh goodness.
Oh man.
Fascinating. That went.
I think Amit was trying to get a word in, guys. I think that's
I sort of liked your phrase pre-drink, and it reminded me of a Naren story, but I don't know if I can relate a Naren story in Naren's presence. That's a bit too much of getting meta for me. No, you mentioned that story about this dude who has a capacity to hold 5 drinks. So when he's with his friends, he'll have 3 drinks, and then he has to go back home and have 2 drinks at home. Otherwise, his wife will think that he was out drinking.
Yeah.
So that is like a post-drink, therefore, the pre-drink and the post-drink.
Yeah.
The circle.
So this is, it's a true fact. There's this guy I used to, let's not digress into one of my stories.
No, go for it. It's
that's
still
a
simplified. We are not on Seen and Unseen.
Seen and the Unseen, we would have done 10 stories. Why only one?
So this guy he was my neighbor in very, very early days, my next door, where my factory was. And he used to stay in Borivali, I used to stay in Malad. He had an MM540 Jeep and he used to drive back. And those were the glorious days, not that much traffic. Now, he'd come out of the factory, take a left turn. When Bombay would general direction would be right turn, but he'd take a left. There was a little dive where you would take a quarter bottle, which contains 3 drinks. Then you would buy a bottle of Bisleri. And then he would ask me, Narendra, tere ko pina hai? He's asking about the water, not this thing. So I am offered the water. I have a sip of the water. If I don't have a sip of the water, he pours out about 100 ml, 80 ml out, and he pours the booze into it. And then he drinks. And every day, so he'll finish it just before reaching Borivali. And every day, he'll explain why he is having those drinks. Because he says, I need 5 drinks every day. But I have 3 drinks here, only 3 drinks, because I have to have 2 drinks at home. Otherwise, my wife will think I'm drinking outside. That was so meta on so many levels. I'm just like,
This reminds me of one story that my dad used to say. I'm guessing all dads would have told the story at some point about these 2 guys who go to the bar and drink every day. And they drink 1 drink for each other, right? And basically one day this guy passes away, his friend passes away, and he goes back to the bar and he starts drinking 2 drinks, 1 for himself and 1 for the friend. And the bartender is very touched by this gesture and all that. 1 month later, he sees that this guy started drinking only 1 drink. He's like, sir, in 1 month, you've forgotten your friend. And he's like, no, I stopped drinking.
I love this.
So I have a drinking story as well. I mean, it's an old joke. You must have heard it. So a priest, a pandit, and sorry, Naren has heard this. A priest, a pandit, and a rabbit go to a bar. So the bartender asks him, what are you going to have? So the priest says, I'll have a single malt. The pandit says, I'll have a lassi. And the rabbit says, I'm only here because of autocorrect.
Oh,
Yeah.
Horrible joke.
Yeah, I shouldn't come on a show which is like a with these connoisseurs of bad jokes and crack nonsense
No,
like
yeah.
this. Apologies.
do we have any drinking stories?
No, this
Sriket,
is
I
an
think
actual
that-
rabbit hole.
I have a
Do you have a drinking story?
I have a drinking story, as in I have a drinking joke, which is all about. I mean, there's this one joke about. Wait, hang on. Let me craft it. It's a very complex joke, so that's why it needs like.
It's a craft beer joke.
It's
That's
a
what
craft beer joke. But so basically there is this one joke where like there's a professor who's a philosophy professor who's telling his students the joke, and the joke is about about a horse that walks into the bar, and at this point he says that the horse walks into the bar, and the bartender asks him, so what do you think? What are you gonna have? And so what do you think? Are you gonna have a whiskey? And the horse replies, I think not, and disappears. So at this point, the professor turns to all the students and says, that's because of the I think therefore I am principle, and that's where the joke is at. But I didn't explain the principle before, because that will be putting the cart before the horse. Descartes before the horse. It's
Brilliant, brilliant. Horrendous and brilliant. Yeah.
Horrendous but brilliant. That actually sums up Simplified quite nicely.
Yes. So yeah,
Since
That was
we have-
refreshing.
wow, refreshing joke break.
Yeah.
No, I think we
Excellent.
have sort of plunged new depths under the masterful influence of Mr. Varma. And
Yeah, you took us on an emotional roller coaster there. By
Yeah,
the way,
man,
there was a
what a-
time when we were all like virtually hugging each other, and now you're like, what actually jokes here each of us are making.
Hey, we had to,
No,
we had to
this is why we
compensate
don't
for
hang
all
out more
the
often.
we had to compensate for all the profundity earlier in the episode, so
Yeah,
we
yeah,
all
that's-
cleansed
This is
ourselves.
my kind of roller coaster lasts a few hours and has all of you sobbing on the floor. So this was hardly.
no, but
Yeah.
I have been the unfortunate recipient of several Amit Varma jokes, and let me assure you, they are worse than Chuck's. They're like even Chuck will have the Chuck's finest also won't. So Amit is pretty bad. It's
Thank you. I'm deeply
Don't-
honored. This is.
Don't bring out all these.
Yeah.
But Amit, has podcasting changed how you
Your
are as a
life.
person in real life? Like Chuck says, you can have 7 billion conversations with people. Like I'm assuming you don't just like go up to a person and
Across
say,
random people.
No. I
on
mean,
the street.
first of all, that's a beautiful thought which Chuck expressed, and I feel the same way. I mean, in the sense that everybody's unique. Whenever, like, remember someone did my sort of podcasting course, and they asked a question about, where is a gap in the market, where is a niche, what kind of show should I do? And I would say that the gap in the market is you. The only thing that sets you apart from the 7 billion people is you. And if you're authentic to yourself, it'll work. Otherwise, it simply won't work, no matter what gap you think you get. So everybody's got a unique story, and there is something there, and which is also why more and more I tell my writing students that if you have people in your house who are more than 70 or even more than 60 or whatever, and you kind of tend to take your grandparents for granted and all of that. They're just there, they're part of the furniture of your life in a sense. But do an oral history, sit down with them, but talk to them maybe individually or together about their lives, and kind of there'll be this potential for a lot coming out of that, and they will find themselves thinking about stuff they may not have thought about for 40-50 years, and you will also find that you didn't know them at all. So I think that that's something that everyone should, like I say, everyone should journal, which is a kind of a way of discovering and shaping yourself. I also think those who can should try something of this sort. How I've changed, I don't know. I mean, earlier Naren was talking about thin and thick desires and all of that, and my sense is that I don't know whether that sort of process is just it comes naturally with getting older, as at least I have, don't know about Naren, and therefore you kind of start changing in these ways, or whether it is a show. So the causation is hard to sort of talk about, but my sense is that I wrote an essay about this also, about how form can shape content and content can shape character. So because I have to do a 5-hour episode, I have to listen deeply, I have to engage deeply, I have to know a lot about this person, and just that brings about a certain seriousness and a terror to my approach, no, which then changes me, which, logically you would assume that it makes me a better listener and it makes me more empathetic at times. Like, I think most of us, most of the time, we are sociopathic. That's a default condition. Main character syndrome. We are the main character in the play in our heads. Everybody else is a prop or a side character. And the more we manage to be aware of this and mindfully come out of this and give people the respect and regard that we should, the better we are. And I think at least my podcast, for those few hours that I'm engaged in it, forces me to kind of do that. I don't know whether it spills over into the rest of me or whatever. I mean, I certainly, like, if I look back over a longer span of time and look at me when, 20 years younger, I was a bit of an asshole. I was shallow. I wasn't good at anything I did. And so over that long span of time, I can see a change. But that's a change that has happened with time. So, so it's hard to disentangle ki podcast kya hai, samay kya hai.
I have an opinion on this. And so I've known Amit pretty well for, I don't know, close to 15 years, 16 years, I don't know. And in some ways, he has not changed at all. So one is, he's always pretty, how shall I say, true to himself. So if someone's said something which goes against his, his principles, he'll make his point heard, or he'll get his point across. He doesn't really care about who the other side is, which I find refreshingly intellectually honest, right? Many people, they will, so I know, I mean, I don't want to take names or say, he said no to people whom most of us would have said yes to, and he said yes to people most of us would say no, because it comes from his own sort of frame of mind. So in that respect, he hasn't changed at all. What he has changed, he's become a lot kinder. As he said, he was an ass. He would not. Back in the day, he was brutal. He wouldn't pull any punches. He would tell you to your face that you are just talking rot. Okay, today he will tell you in the nicest possible way that you're talking rot. He'll tell you, but he'll tell it to you in a very kindly way.
So what you're saying, Naren, is
basically he's become Canadian. Yeah.
So what you're saying, Naren, is if we had invited Amit for Simplified number 2, this would have turned out to be a very different. Amazing.
One of the things that I also wanted to just sort of touch upon is the fact that at least to us from the outside, you're probably going to be the smartest person in most rooms you walk into, right? Yet you keep sort of reiterating over and over again. I think I've heard it from you at least 4 or 5 times over a podcast and during writing, etc., that you should never sort of prioritize cleverness over insights, right? So, and based on what Naren said, like, how did that play out? Like, was that a always sort of first principle for you, or was that a learning over a period of time to sort of put the listener/reader first?
It's a learning over a period of time, because when you're young, you're arrogant, right? You think you're the cat's whiskers, you think you know it all.
I think it's an age thing, yeah.
It's an age thing. So I'll digress briefly, and I'll go back to something I think Christopher Hitchens said or Sam Harris said, I don't remember, in the context of atheism, where they kind of pointed out that even a believer who thinks that, hey, I'm not an atheist, there are thousands of gods in the world. You believe in one God. You're an atheist for all the other gods. Right. So in that sense, even the most devout believer is actually basically a complete atheist. It's just that one thing that he chooses to believe in. And in the context of knowledge, I think that really applies in the sense that all of us will be really good at one or two things. Right. I think I have deep knowledge of a couple of areas, and that's it. Right. I know people who have deep knowledge of many areas. It's rare. But most people will have deep knowledge of just one or two things and nothing else, and otherwise they're on a journey and they're figuring shit out. So I think it's important to kind of have sort of that humility, and also just thinking aloud. I wonder if Naren will agree with me, is that I think a lot of youthful arrogance comes from assuming that you're going to get a certain kind of spectacular success or fame or whatever, and therefore you're arrogant because of what hasn't really happened yet, or what you think you are but you really aren't. So I think just getting a little older and getting that perspective and those thin desires of seeking the approval of others kind of goes out of the window. I think those are sort of important reality checks. Yeah.
I think that's a great that's a great way of looking at it. Yeah.
The only reason I ask is, I mean, obviously, hopefully we are getting to that stage, but also I find that on average, a show's listeners is at least 5 to 10 years younger than its hosts, and therefore usually people are figuring stuff out, right? Because I don't think anyone our age listens to Simplified. They probably listen to The Seen and the Unseen or something much more different, right? So as you age, right, some things become like obvious, saying this is how life is, and you figure shit out. But I think it would have been useful advice to have coming from people that you like to listen to, not necessarily your parents, at a younger age, right? So because to be honest, no one likes listening to their parents, but it is probably useful to have that. And also at the same time, as you grow older, you're like, yeah, this is the default, right? Like, and everyone else will learn it eventually. So yeah, I just wanted to touch upon that.
It's a fascinating episode, but we must take a break, and we will see you back on the other side. And now back to our chat with Amit Varma. Are you enjoying episode 300 so far? We hope you are. So let's just dive right back into it.
I think, you mentioned the phrase "as you age," and I think that there's a deep truth there which you realize as you age, which is that, when you're young, when you're a kid, when you're 12 or 13, and you look at adults and you think adults have it all figured out, and that one day I will also have it all figured out and I'll be an adult. The point is, nobody has it all figured out. Everybody is winging it. That's what adulthood is, right? And therefore, I think, and I think it's useful to accept that and to come to terms with that and not think that you have to know or that you have to be in control or whatever. We are all sort of figuring shit out. We're all struggling with stuff. And what is then important is that you have those moments of connection with friends or with people you speak to, or you can be mindful of the small joys around you all the time, which you otherwise ignore. And you enjoy them as they are. But to think that you will one day be sorted in a greater sense than you are already, that's perhaps not going to happen. I mean, the only way in which you're perhaps going to be more sorted is you might have more clarity about you might have more clarity about what you want from life, maybe lose some random thin desires on the margins. But basically, nobody ever figures it out. And I don't think the quest should ever to be in a space where you are necessarily mentally at peace or you figured stuff out. So just that notion is of adulthood and all of that is kind of interesting. I don't know if I digressed.
No, I think it kind of makes perfect sense.
When you grow up, you realize how kind the older people were to you, right? When you were like, I will be different from the rest of the world. And therefore, sort of my sort of exhortation to any young sort of creator listening to this is to forget what the outcome you think ideally is going to be and just start doing whatever it is that you want to do, right? Because as we hit 300 episodes, I feel like we have enough sort of clout to say, just do it. And no one cares about what you do, actually.
A simple hack for that, honestly, for me is like always, look at life in like bunches of 5 and think back about yourself 5 years ago, and pretty much almost always when you think back about yourself 5 years ago, you're like, what an idiot, right? And, and then you should then put yourself and put yourself in the position of that, and then look at yourself and then just think that, okay, I'm like 5 years older now and I'm looking back at myself right now and I'm going to be evaluating myself as an idiot. So that at least gives you a level of humility.
If I can get a couple of quick points in, since we're talking about advice to younger people, I think the biggest piece of advice I could give is stop judging people. Don't be judgmental, right? Don't be judgmental of others. And if you could see yourself the way your future self from 5 years later will, you'd be judgmental of yourself as well. And there's no need to be, I think, judgmental of your past self as well. But I think young people, it's easy to be judgmental of others because then you feel more knowledgeable or more virtuous or whatever the case might be. But one should kind of watch out for that tendency. Naren, you were saying?
There's this poem in Through the Looking Glass, Lewis Carroll, called. I'm reciting it from memory, so forgive me if I miss out something. It's called
Internet तो invent ही नहीं हुआ है ना.
कौन Google करेगा क्या करेगा? It is called Old Father William, and roughly the first couple of paragraphs. Your old Father William, the young man said, and your hair is exceedingly white, yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age this is right? When I was young, the old man said, I feared it might injure the brain, but now that I'm sure that I have none, why I do it again and again. So this is like a huge metaphor for all of us, right?
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah.
Wow, that is brilliant. I mean, how do you top that? We have no further questions to ask you.
So I will ask a further question to each of you. Simplified episode 300.
Each of us.
To each of you. No, I mean to all of you.
He's come more prepared
each
than
of you too. Yeah. No, I haven't prepared at all, boss. I kind of
raw
woke up
material has
late
reached the
because
factory.
I woke up late because the alarm on my new phone didn't work properly, which is why I said can we record at 6:45 instead of 6:30. I need to drink some coffee and be a functioning person. But so my question is really that, in your 5-year journey, after your 5-year journey, and taking off from what Tony said earlier about advice, after your 5-year journey, what advice would you give to young people listening to this or creators listening to this? Because, I mean, obviously everybody has to make their own mistakes, and advice is rarely useful for that reason. But otherwise, if you think about what you've learned and what you've changed, what is your sense?
This is actually something that the three of us, Srike wasn't there at that event. A few months back, we were at an event where Simplified was invited to speak. And we were like, it was a very simplified episode in the sense when we went in, we had absolutely no idea what we were doing over there or what we were even going to talk about. Then we thought, it's an event with potential creators in the audience and maybe some creators as well. So let's talk about that. And I pretty much riffed off what you had told me, Amit, if you remember back in when we had recorded for Getting Meta, which is just start and figure it out along the way. And I think that advice holds true. I've found myself giving it to a lot of youngsters who are kind of like, youngsters and old folks as well, who are kind of like, hey, I have this idea. I don't know if I should do it. I don't know if it's the right thing just yet. It's okay. Just start and you'll figure it out along the way. And I use Simplified as one example, and see that's another example of in the sense, a show that started off someplace and ended up completely different. So that would be my simple advice. There are lots of nuances we can go into there, but I say just start and figure it out along the way. I think
agree.
that might be true of most. I think I speak for most folks, but please, if you guys have something more nuanced to add, please go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing. I'd seen this poster in somebody's office, which I really liked. It said, "Ready, fire, aim." So it's a great philosophy to do in life.
This is Elon Musk. Chuck.
Wow.
Elon Musk's.
I love that.
Yeah.
But one thing that I have had a couple of people come up to me and talk about like starting podcasts and stuff like that. And I'd say one important thing, which you don't need to have right when you start, but maybe somewhere along the way, you really need to kind of like have a good sense of what is that raison d'etre, what is your why are you doing this, right? Is it because like what I've seen with a lot of content creators is that they kind of fall in love with the outcome that I'm going to be like a famous content creator at the end of it, right? Versus focusing on why they're doing this, because it's not that, okay, you might have an objective of becoming a really big content creator, and that's fine to have. The point is, you're not going to get your drive to kind of keep going and the entire motivation to continue creating good content and content that's relatable if you don't enjoy doing it in itself, right? If you're doing it as a means to an end, then it's not really going to serve you for a very, very sustainable way, right? And that's my personal perspective. I'm sure there are people who work differently and who have better drive, but like for us, Simplified becoming like a great podcast or getting X thousand listeners or whatever else has never been. Like, we are still continually surprised when people approach us and they say they listen to Simplified. Because honestly, for me at least, and for all of us, it's like we come once in a week, speak to these 4 boxes, vent our shit, and then go away, right? And we don't care who's listening or what is happening at the end of it, right? And that's actually like taken off and become its own thing. So, and then when people come up to us and mostly to say that, oh, I wish we had run into Naren instead of you. But when people do come up to us, yeah, true story. But when people do come up to us, it's like a very surprising validation. It's great, but it's a very surprising validation, because for us, it's just a place where we come to hang out because the content is why we are here, not for like X thousand listeners or whatever else.
Yeah. No, I think the only thing to add is basically that if you are listening to content, it's probably the successful version of it, right? You haven't seen Chuck and me on YouTube because we did one video which was a colossal fail and we don't want to think about it. We did the third slip, which is actually the third iteration of the first slip, which was another failure, right? And the only thing that will happen is you will cringe, but no one else sees it. So it's okay, right? Like don't reverse Sri Kid's 5-year principle and say, okay, 5 years from now, I'm going to think about what I started now and think of myself as an idiot, so I won't start it. The only thing that will happen is that if your content is bad or like not, for the public, no one will read it. That's about it. So
I have one more answer to Amit's question. And this is very timely because I actually was writing this for an article today. I can't say just yet who it is for or what the subject actually is, but it starts with this, and it's also a great opportunity to get the quote approved from you, Amit. I once had the pleasure of interviewing Amit Varma, the man behind the popular Seen of the Unseen podcast. He gave several tips on content creation, but his advice about charting one's life stood out, and I generously paraphrase. What do you want your average day to look like 10 years from now? Not the outlier day where you win an award or strike a deal or cross a milestone, but the average regular day. If you can work towards making this day appealing and worth living, then you're set. Many make the mistake of thinking only of the outlier days when dreaming about what they want to do in their careers or passions. These are wise words which you said.
These are very wise words, and I'm amazed I said them. I don't have a memory of this, but thank you. Wow. At my age, one forgets things. But yeah, and I want to, all of you, obviously, I agree with everything you said, and I'll sort of double click on what Shrikit said as well about the importance of not having a particular goal in mind, but enjoying the process. Like, people these days are being extremely alarmist about AI, and I am optimistic about it. While I think it will achieve everything that people are scared about, I think that's great for us. So I think in future, for example, you guys won't be required to be here. 10 years later, you can put AI together and say, have a conversation between these 4 people on this subject, and your voices will have a conversation and it'll sound exactly like you, authentic, and you can tweak it to be smarter or whatever. And I don't think that's a threat. That if in future AI is producing books and art and music and everything that is the equal of anything we can do, I don't think that is a threat, but simply because what should matter for a creator is not that output or the validation they will get from the output, but the process. So the question is, do you enjoy writing? If you enjoy writing, that is what matters, rather than ki book likhunga, Booker Prize jeetega. If you enjoy creating music, that core enjoyment will never go away. That's the enjoyment which makes you an artist. If the 4 of you enjoy talking to each other, that's what matters. In a sense, that's why you're doing it. So for any young creator, the question is, are you enjoying it? Is it would you do it anyway? Would you dance if no one was looking, for example?
Yeah. So would you podcast if nobody was hearing?
Yeah.
There we go. That's deeply profound. Yeah. So yes, Amit, thank you for all that you have done for the Indian podcasting scene.
On behalf of India now.
On behalf of India, you guys are north, south, west, east. Yeah. No, but you do realize the trouble that you've gotten yourself into, because now you've called me for episode 100, you've called me for episode 300. If you do not call me for episode 500. Great offense will happen. Mark the date. Thank you so much. It's been an honor, and more than an honor, it's been a pleasure, chatting with you guys, and I wish we could do more of this. So thank you so much. What a great show, and I do hope you reach 500. You don't have to call me, but I hope you get there.
Yes. We are definitely
I'm sending you a calendar invite for 2027. Right? Who knows where we will be. Looking back at this episode in its 2D glory, saying what idiots
when we shall have 8 hosts and all will still be men.
Ouch.
Yeah, and I'll be doing like 28-hour episodes. I don't care if nobody listens.
Geometric, but not progression. Naren, you know what to do.
Yeah. So yes, thanks everyone, and thanks Amit. So,
thanks everyone for listening
joining
for
us,
300 episodes,
and tolerating us for this long.
Sorry, I was just about to say, for those who are listening to this episode because you came in from Amit's plug,
Give me a break.
most podcasts actually stop at around this point. Yes, Naren, please carry on.
Yeah. Stay safe, stay seen, and stay simplified.